Hey, Texas Values friends. Jonathan Sines here, president of Texas Values. I'm here on the floor of the exhibit hall in Big D, Dallas, Texas. CPAC is here. There are thousands of people here at the local, state, national, and international level. A lot of interest and attention, and a lot of talk about some of the issues we care about: faith, family, and freedom. And someone who knows a lot about those issues is our good friend, State Representative Bryan Slaton. He's spending time around our booth, walking around a little bit, and he's been getting some attention himself. We'll talk about those issues in just a minute. But if you haven't been to some of our social media channels, check us out on Twitter, Instagram, of course, Facebook, because we've got some big announcements. Our policy event's coming up September 23rd and 24th. Coach Kennedy, who won his football prayer case at the Supreme Court, he's going to be speaking. Kevin Roberts from Heritage Foundation, a lot of good stuff. But let's talk with our guest, Representative Slaton. I want to cover two topics as we're talking that's been getting a lot of attention depending on which camp you're in. Number one, there was a lot of talk during the Republican convention about an idea not only that you had, but you certainly were leading on talking a lot about, and that was the fact that whoever leads in the House or even the Senate chamber, that party should be able to decide not only who chairs committees, but it should be from that particular political party. And then the other thing is some legislation you proposed about not having kids at drag queen events. All right, let's start in reverse order because this has been getting a lot of attention. And I mean, I think people are just, not overwhelmed, but they just can't believe that there's so much of it. It seems like everywhere you turn, there are all of a sudden all these drag queen events, and it's all of a sudden become not a big deal that kids are there. It's out of control.
It is. So I've had people call me. I've had people in the homosexual community call me and say, hey, I'm a homosexual, live in Dallas County, and drag queens should not be around children. So thank you for doing this. And it's a common sense thing. We don't want heterosexual strippers around kids putting dollar bills in their underwear. It's completely inappropriate. It's not even questioned. But all of a sudden we get an adult man in women's clothing, and it's somehow good for the kid and helpful, and it's just so wrong. We have to protect kids from the sexualization.
It's over the top too. I mean, and it bothers me sometimes. Anytime I see like a video come up, I don't even want to watch it because they, very quickly it seems to, be stuff that's just inappropriate. I don't want to look at it. I'm an adult. It's clearly inappropriate for kids, and it just seems like there's this intention, like they want to have kids there. They want to, put on a bigger show for kids and act like it's not a big deal. It is a big deal, and it's concerning. And to your point, right? You see these adult establishments, if you will. You've got to be 21 to get in there. You don't ever see kids there. I mean, it's sort of this acceptance of that would never be appropriate. They've gone way past that line and trying to convince us that we're crazy or there's something wrong with us. We're saying this has got to stop. Talk to us about your legislative proposal on this issue.
Well, we're still trying to figure out the exact route we're going to do it, if it's going to take 1 or 4 bills to try to do this. But the idea is just protecting kids from the sexualization. It comes from that same nerve where we have porn in schools, we have drag queens with kids, we have the gender modification of children, and then we're looking at human trafficking. A large chunk of human trafficking is adults wanting to have sex with children. It's all in the same nerve, and all those others besides human trafficking, they're trying to groom the kids to where it's okay to be in inappropriate relationships. So why is the grooming, getting them to the doorstep, sometimes acceptable, but human trafficking is bad? It all works together, and we have to protect kids from all of it.
Well, and look, we saw this stuff a couple of years ago. Drag queens, whatever you want to call it. I mean, look, and I looked up some of the definitions. I mean, really by definitions, they are adult performers, and there's usually some sexual content to it. I mean, and so you saw some of this to where they're like, okay, we're going to go to public libraries and read, and not all of them were as toned down, but some were to where they tried to act like we're just reading, and then you start to see it more and more to where they start dancing around, and now they're taking their clothes off and all this stuff, and you're like, this is not a story hour, right? Yeah. And then you saw it, okay, now we're going to do these in public schools. They move from the public libraries, and more they keep trying to change or to increase the type of venues that they're in, and then now we're in a situation where they're putting a lot of pressure trying to focus on kids. You could argue, right, they're taking advantage of the fact, if you will, there's no regulation because we wouldn't have thought that it was necessary, I
Yes.
would imagine.
Oh, yeah. Well, think about drag queens. They take a characterization of a woman that is not complimentary. They only focus on the sexual nature and the kind of the high makeup, high dress. That's it. They don't focus on any other aspect of a woman. And the fact that the left thinks that's okay to just, I think it's demoralizing. They say, oh, these are the only good qualities to a woman we want to present to these kids, and they defend it. And then you add in there for decades, as the LGBTQ, or 20, 30 years ago, just the gay movement, as they moved along, NAMBLA, North American Association of Man-Boy Love, they were always trying to push the ball down the field, right? And there was always people in the gay movement saying, hold on, we're not a part of NAMBLA. Well, now, as all this drag queen stuff's popping up, no one's trying to distance themselves from NAMBLA. That should be our concern, and where it's...
Well, look, I mean, I don't know what the numbers are, and I don't know how this works on social media. All I know is I feel like I see more and more stories every week about public school teachers that are getting caught having sex or some type of appropriate relationship with kids. Not just men, but also women. And so you just sense, or your sense is, that more of that's happening because of some of these other things that we see that are happening in some of these drag queen events, the LGBT movement, the effort to sort of normalize an increase in sexual activity or exposure to sexual content for kids, and it's problematic. All right, let's talk about the other issue, because we're going to see where that goes in the legislation.
Yeah.
Bills can start being filed in November. The session starts in January for the state of Texas. Another issue that's going to come up that is not I take that back. There's not a vote for it. There's a vote for who the speaker is, but members individually, House members, don't vote on who gets to be the chair of a committee. That's a
specific vote.
Right.
But I did present an amendment that said only the majority party, those are the only people the speaker can appoint as chairman. So that means whatever the public votes for to be in control of the House, those are the only people.
But the vote of deciding who chairs a committee, that is left solely to the speaker and his or her team. So we didn't see that last time, right? We saw, in the Senate, I think there was maybe one Democrat, Lucio, if you will, that was the chair of a committee. It's really, we're seeing this issue in the House. It seemed like Republican Party delegates at the state level were very supportive that if the Republicans were in the majority, all those committees should be chaired by Republicans.
You would think. So between now and November, people are going to spend a lot of money saying how bad the Democrat Party is, how horrible it would be if Beto was our governor, and then the next week going to shift gears and say, well, let's make some of them chairmen, because they're not that bad. They're the same Democrats that are ruining our country with the Biden touch, right? I mean, it's the same policies. They're against us on the border. They're against us on protecting children. They're against us on education. They're against us on gun rights. And we're going to give them authority they don't earn on Election Day. We're tying an arm behind our back in a major battle, and we're destined to lose. That's what's sad.
Well, I think this matters to voters because they see sometimes whether who the chair of the committee is can certainly have a direct impact on whether that issue moves. And look, we're not a partisan organization, but the reality is what you see is oftentimes you see that if there's a Republican and it's a pro-life issue, it's more likely to move. You have a Democrat in that position, it's more likely to die. I mean, we saw that on the Save Women's Sports issue where the chair of House Education was Harold Dutton and was not very supportive of that issue, to say the least. My question, though, is, and I'm curious whether or not you can tell me if you've had a conversation with Speaker Phelan on this, and what do you think the thinking is over there?
Well, we haven't had a conversation about it, and currently, the way anybody is elected speaker, I describe it as a three-legged stool. They, one, want votes. Two, we want these items passed as the Democrats. And three, these are no-fly zones. If we're going to support you, we don't want to take it in the teeth and have conservative legislation pumped down our throat. So there's a three-legged stool that comes with our values being sold down the river. And so because he was elected, and I appreciate y'all's stance you took when he came out announcing his support from the Democrats after we didn't know who won the election in 2020. He announced support from the Democrats, and so for him to stay in power, he's going to have Democrat. He's going to have Democrat chairman.
What you're referring to is Texas Values put out a statement expressing our concern when Dave Phelan was elected Speaker at the beginning of the 2021 legislation because he had supported an amendment to a bill that was supportive of LGBT principles, and no one was really talking about it. And the timing, once the legislative session started, we got down to business. But before it started, we did express our concern,
and it was the principled stand that I and many others appreciated.
The Speaker of the House has a lot of influence on what happens during a legislative session, and so it'll be interesting to see what Republicans decide. Who ends up? I mean, we got to see what happens with the elections. Who ends up being Speaker, and how this issue plays out? Because I do think it's been talked about before, but this is probably the first time that you've seen so much talk that there's likely to be a decision made. And, will we go a different direction? We'll see. It's going to be real interesting. But either way, Representative Slaton will be talking about it one way or another, I'm sure, and you can find out more information about what he's doing if you follow him to see on these issues. And, whether it's the drag queen issue, these other issues about who chairs committees, these are some of the many things that I think voters need to be thinking about when they go to the polls, and also whoever's elected, talking to their representatives when the session starts in January. So, Representative Slaton, thanks for being our guest today on this special segment of our Texas Values Report right here on the floor of CPAC in Dallas, Texas.
Awesome.